Okay, let's unpack this. When you hear Mongol Empire, what pops into your head? I bet it's horses, right? Endless horses. Storms of arrows.
Genghis Khan, maybe. That image of unstoppable conquest.
Exactly.
Right.
Building this massive land empire, the biggest contiguous one ever. They're military.
Yeah.
Something else. Truly unique, historically speaking.
And that image, that story of just pure military genius, it's powerful because, well, for a while it was absolutely true. They really did dominate through this incredibly effective and frankly brutal system.
But that's the paradox, isn't it? That's what we're diving into today.
Right. The Mongol Empire, the very definition of military power in its time, didn't actually fall because someone outfought them.
No stronger army came along.
Nope. It fell because of something, well, way less dramatic, more mundane, more pervasive, definitely, and maybe ultimately just unavoidable.
The money, the admin, the balance sheet, basically.
That's it.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to get past the image of the heroic cavalry charge, the myth of this invincible force. We want to dig into the, let's say, the cold, hard economic and administrative reality. Because that's what seems to decide how long these great powers actually last.
Consider this your shortcut, yeah, to understanding what really brings an empire down. Not just the Mongols, but maybe, well, maybe all of them.
And we're going to kick things off with something pretty dramatic, a maybe unsettling thought experiment that comes up in the sources we looked at.
Yeah, this idea, could the Mongols have actually destroyed, say, 100,000 European knights? Just wiped them out in 3 days.
Sounds insane, right? 100,000 heavy cavalry gone in 72 hours.
Well, okay, the number itself, 100,000, that's probably rhetoric. You know how medieval chroniclers were? They loved big numbers to make a victory sound bigger or more tragic.
So it's not about the exact body count.
Not really, no. The point of the thought experiment is to use that extreme scenario to really dissect the system the Mongols used. How did they inflict those absolutely catastrophic defeats? Think Lednica, think Mohi back in the 1240s.
We need to understand just how terrifyingly effective their engine of destruction really was.
Exactly. Before we talk about why it eventually stalled, we need to appreciate the perfection of that initial machine.
Okay, let's build that engine then, piece by piece. Against the European forces, think heavy armor, slow movement, shock tactics. The Mongols had, what, 5 core advantages? That made them just uniquely terrifying. Let's start with the first couple. Speed and tech.
Right. First one, and maybe the hardest for settled societies to even comprehend, let alone counter, was just sheer mobility and endurance. Unbelievable mobility.
These guys practically lived on horseback.
Born in the saddle, yeah. They could routinely cover, say, 60, even 100 miles a day after day. Try getting a heavily armored knight and his single warhorse to do that. It's impossible.
And the secret sauce wasn't just the rider's skill, right? It was the horses themselves, or rather, the number of horses.
That's the key. Continuous remounting. Each warrior didn't just have one horse. They typically had, what, 3 to 5, sometimes even more.
Wow.
So when one horse got tired, they'd just jump onto a fresh one, and they do this multiple times a day.
So they could strike, pull back, circle around, attack again, much faster than any conventional army could even react.
Exactly. The enemy's still trying to figure out where the first attack came from, and the Mongols are already repositioning for the next one. It's disorienting and exhausting for the opponent.
And that incredible speed worked perfectly with their main weapon system. Advantage number 2, mounted archery and the composite bow.
Ah, the bow, yes. This wasn't your standard European longbow, powerful as that was. This was a different beast entirely, a technological marvel for its time.
What made it so special? The construction.
Yeah, it was composite, laminated, layers of different materials glued together really precisely. You'd have wood, maybe bamboo or mulberry as the core. Then animal horn on the belly side, the side facing the archer.
That compresses.
Right? And sinew on the back, the side facing away, which stretches. All held together with animal glue, often fish bladder glue, incredibly strong and wrapped in bark, usually birch bark, to protect it from moisture.
Sounds complicated.
It was. But this structure allowed it to store a huge amount of energy in a relatively short bow. That meant a very high draw weight. We're talking maybe up to 160 pounds sometimes.
Which is massive, more than the English longbow.
Significantly more, often. And critically, because it was shorter and recurved, it was much more efficient to use from horseback, even at a full gallop.
So high draw weight gets you high arrow speed, meaning
Yeah.
you could punch through lighter armor or find gaps in heavier plate.
Definitely. And it gave them range. They could rain arrows down on an enemy from a distance, picking them off, disrupting formations, causing chaos before ever having to close for hand-to-hand combat.
They could essentially bleed an army dry before the real fight even started,
Yeah.
deciding when and where the messy, costly melee would happen, or if it needed to happen at all.
Exactly. But that kind of tactic, fighting at a distance, using maneuver, it requires incredible coordination. Which brings us neatly to their third big advantage, discipline, command, and control.
Right. This wasn't like a typical European feudal army, was it? Where you've got a bunch of nobles bringing their own retainers, maybe with questionable loyalty or training.
Not at all. The Mongol army was a professional force. Highly organized, very disciplined. It was built on a decimal system.
We hear terms like Tumen, Mingin.
Yeah.
What were those, basically?
So the smallest unit was the Arban, just 10 men. They lived, trained, fought together. 10 Arbans made a zun, or company, 100 men, led by a Yuzbashi. 10 of those made a Mingin a battalion, 1,000 men, and 10 Mingins made the Tumen.
10,000 men, the main operational unit.
Right, commanded by the elite generals, the Noyans. And crucially, leadership wasn't just based on who your father was. It was often based on merit, on skill and loyalty shown in battle. This ensured pretty high-quality command throughout the ranks.
And they could talk to each other on the battlefield. Yeah. Coordinate these huge formations.
Oh, yeah. They had sophisticated systems, flags, signal horns, whistling arrows, mounted messengers relaying orders rapidly across even huge distances. They could execute really complex maneuvers involving tens of thousands of men with remarkable precision, things European armies just couldn't manage reliably.
Which is essential for their most famous and maybe most terrifying tactic, their fourth strength, psychological warfare and deception.
They weren't just warriors, they were masters of messing with the enemy's head.
How so?
Well, before battle, they'd often try to make their army seem much larger than it was, lighting extra campfires at night, tying dummies or bundles of brush onto spare horses to kick up more dust.
Making it look like a truly overwhelming horde.
Exactly. They'd spread rumors about their own cruelty and invincibility to sow fear before they even arrived. And then, in battle, the ultimate deception. The feigned retreat.
Ah, yes, the classic move, luring the enemy into a trap.
And it wasn't just a panicked run. It was a planned, disciplined maneuver. Only an army with incredible command and control could pull it off, pretend to break and flee, draw the enemy into a disorderly pursuit, and then on signal, turn around instantly and counterattack, often coordinating with hidden reserve that would pop up and ambush the pursuers.
Deadly. It played right into the Europeans' tendency to charge.
Perfectly. And underpinning all of this tactical brilliance was their fifth core strength: logistical independence and resilience.
They didn't need massive supply wagons trailing behind them like other armies.
Much less so, yeah. Coming from a nomadic pastoral background, they were used to living off the land, or rather, living off their herds, which moved with them. They could find grazing for their horses almost anywhere. Their own diet was very portable, lots of dried meat, fermented milk, kumis, calorie-dense stuff.
So less need for vulnerable supply lines carrying grain and fodder.
Exactly. This meant they could move faster, operate deeper in enemy territory, and be far more resilient if cut off temporarily. They weren't tied to roads or depots in the same way a settled army was. Their supply chain, in a way, was the landscape itself, plus ruthless requisitioning from locals when needed.
Okay, so that's the Mongol war machine. Fast, disciplined, masters of ranged combat and psychological warfare, logistically independent. Now let's flip the coin, hold that image, and let's contrast it with the weaknesses of European knightly forces at the time. The sources really highlight their vulnerabilities against this kind of enemy.
Right. The European knight, on his own terms, in a head-on charge against infantry or other heavy cavalry, he was a devastating weapon system, huge impact. But he came with significant drawbacks, especially against the Mongols. First, obviously, heavy armor and limited mobility. Full plate armor is great protection, no doubt, but it's heavy. It restricts movement, agility, and critically, it exhausts both the knight and his expensive warhorse relatively quickly, especially in a prolonged maneuvering battle.
They were built for that one big decisive charge, like a medieval sledgehammer.
Exactly. A sprint, not a marathon. And the effectiveness of that sprint, that charge, depended entirely on cohesion and infantry support. Meaning the knights needed to stay together in formation to have that shock effect. And they needed supporting infantry, like spearmen or crossbowmen, to protect their flanks and deal with enemies who got too close or didn't break. If the knights got isolated, separated from each other or from their infantry,
they lose their advantage. They become slow, heavy targets.
Precisely. Easy pickings for mobile horse archers who could just circle them and shoot them down.
And keeping that cohesion together was tough because of, what, communication lags?
Yeah, that was a major issue. Medieval European armies were often these patchwork coalitions. Feudal lords bringing their own men, different languages, different loyalties sometimes. There wasn't usually a single, unified command structure like the Mongols had.
So orders were slow, hard to get across the battlefield.
Very slow. Relayed by messengers on horseback, maybe shouting, maybe signal flags, but nothing as fast or sophisticated as the Mongol system. It meant sub-commanders often had to guess what was happening or act on their own initiative, which could lead to units charging off prematurely or failing to react quickly enough to a Mongol maneuver like a feigned retreat.
Leading to fragmentation.
Exactly. And this lack of flexibility wasn't just organizational, it was baked into their rigid tactical doctrine.
They only knew one way to fight.
Pretty much. European military thinking and training revolved almost entirely around the head-on shock charge. Smash the enemy line. That was the goal. They weren't really trained for complex maneuvers, for controlled retreats, for dealing with an enemy that wouldn't stand and fight toe-to-toe.
So when the Mongols did their feigned retreat, the knights' training basically screamed, charge, pursue, finish them.
Right, which played directly into the Mongol trap. They only understood forward momentum, escalation. They lacked the doctrinal flexibility to say, hold on, this looks suspicious, let's regroup.
And finally, tying all this slowness and rigidity together was the massive logistical burden.
Oh, absolutely. Those big war horses weren't like the hardy Mongol ponies. They needed huge amounts of high-quality food, barley, and careful tending. The whole army moved at the pace of its slowest supply wagons.
Very vulnerable supply lines.
Extremely vulnerable. If the Mongols could raid the baggage train, burn the fodder, or just maneuver the European army away from its supplies, they could cripple it without even needing a major battle. Starvation and exhaustion would do the job.
Okay, this contrast is stark.
Yeah.
Now, here's where it gets, as you said, really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's run the thought experiment. Let's put 100,000 of these European knights, maybe overconfident, prone to charging onto an open field against a fully prepared Mongol army, using all those advantages.
Yeah.
Walk us through the hypothetical 3-day scenario. How does this perfect Mongol system guarantee that cascading collapse?
Right, so day 1, disruption and the fatal hook. The Mongols aren't going to charge headlong. That's not their style against heavy cavalry. They start with light cavalry screens, lots of arrows, probing attacks, harassment. The goal is to annoy, to provoke, to frustrate the enemy commander.
Make him impatient, make him want to lash out.
Exactly. And sooner or later, the European commander, maybe feeling the pressure, maybe overconfident in his knight's power, maybe just following doctrine, orders the vanguard, the best, heaviest knights to charge out and scatter those annoying horse archers.
And that is the moment the trap is sprung.
That's the fatal error. The Mongol light cavalry immediately execute the feigned retreat. They turn and ride away, maybe looking like they're panicked. The heavy knights, committed to the charge, thunder after them.
Losing formation, getting strung out.
Getting strung out, outrunning their slower infantry support, believing they're about to crush the fleeing enemy, but they're being lured further and further away from their main army.
Into the kill zone.
Right. As the vanguard pursues, hidden Mongol reserves heavy cavalry, more archers, perfectly positioned based on those flag signals suddenly appear. They might hit the pursuing knights from the flanks, or worse, sweep in behind them, cutting off their path back to safety.
So the vanguard is now isolated, surrounded, exhausted from the pursuit.
Exactly. Fragmentation begins. These isolated units are hit with concentrated arrow fire from multiple directions, then charged by fresh, heavy Mongol cavalry who have been resting. Casualties mount very quickly. The initial European strength becomes a liability. Day 1 ends with the European vanguard shattered and the main body demoralized, having watched the disaster unfold.
Okay, that's devastating already. What happens on day 2? Encirclement and grinding attrition.
Day 2 isn't necessarily about another big, decisive clash. It's about tightening the noose and breaking the enemy's will. The Mongols used their mobility to envelop, or partially envelop, the remaining European force. They exploit the communication gaps, the slow reaction time, constant pressure, continuous archery volleys from different directions. The Europeans are pinned down. They can't easily maneuver. They can't rest properly. They can't resupply. Mongol light cavalry might raid their camps, target the remaining baggage, pick off foragers,
making them bleed, keeping them awake.
and the psychological impact here is huge. The sources often mention nocturnal raids, constant harassment. The Europeans can't sleep. Their horses aren't getting fed properly. Their command structure is likely in chaos after the day one disaster. Morale plummets. Even if the main battle doesn't happen on day two, the army is effectively being dismantled by exhaustion, hunger, fear, and relentless low-level attacks.
So by the morning of day 3, total collapse and mopping up.
By day 3, the European force is likely paralyzed. Leadership might be dead or ineffective. The troops and horses are exhausted, hungry, thirsty. The cohesion that made the nights dangerous is gone. They're just isolated clusters of terrified men.
And now the Mongols deliver the final blow.
Now they commit their main reserves, the units they deliberately held back on day 2, fresh and ready. They launch concentrated attacks, maybe waves of arrows, followed by coordinated charges from heavy cavalry hitting the weakest points in the dissolving European line.
It doesn't even need to be a massive battle at this point.
Probably not. The enemy is already broken mentally and physically. The final Mongol push just needs to crack whatever remaining resistance there is. Once the formations completely shatter and men start fleeing,
then the fast Mongol light cavalry are unleashed.
Exactly. They run down the fleeing knights. Because knights are slow and exhausted, escape is difficult. The Mongols aim for maximum fatalities. It's not just about winning the battle. It's about annihilating the enemy force, making sure it can't regroup or fight again, a complete liquidation.
Wow, okay, that paints a picture. A terrifyingly efficient system designed for utter destruction. It created that myth, that legend of Mongol invincibility, mobility, just completely overwhelming mass and static defense.
It was the ultimate expression of that principle, yes.
But this is the crucial question then, isn't it? If this system was so perfect, so devastating, was it truly invincible? Could anyone stand up to it?
That's the perfect transition, because the answer is, well, not entirely. To explore that, we need to shift our focus dramatically. We leave the hypothetical fields of Europe and travel to the very real plains of India late in the 13th century.
Okay.
We need to look at a specific battle, the Battle of Kili in 1299, because Kili serves as this fascinating historical counterpoint. It shows that while the Mongols were brilliant, their aura of absolute invincibility could be challenged.
So what's the setup for Kili? Why were the Mongols in India?
Well, remember, by the late 13th century, the unified Mongol Empire had fractured into successor states, the Khantanes. The Chagatai Khanate ruled Central Asia, and its leader, Duwa Khan, was ambitious. He saw the immense wealth of the Delhi Sultanate in northern India as a prize.
Standard Mongol operating procedure, really. Go where the loot is.
Pretty much. So he sent a massive invasion force, led by his son, Kuetlu Khwaja, south into India. Their goal was likely Delhi itself and the riches of the Sultanate, which was then ruled by a very formidable sultan, Alauddin Khilji.
Alauddin Khilji. He's a key figure here, isn't he?
Absolutely. So let's look at the opposing forces. The Mongols under Kuetlu Khwaja had a huge army. Chroniclers, again, throw around massive numbers like 200,000, but a more realistic estimate is probably somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 troops.
Still enormous for the time. And presumably the standard, highly effective Mongol organization.
Oh yes. They had their wings, led by experienced generals like Hilak and Tamar Buga. Kuetlu Khwaja commanded the center. And crucially, they had that hidden reserve force waiting for the ambush opportunity, commanded by a general named Targi. Classic Mongol setup.
Okay. And facing them, the Delhi Sultanate forces under Alauddin Khilji. How did they stack up?
Numbers are tricky again, but estimates suggest maybe 30,000 to 50,000 troops for Delhi. Fewer than the Mongols, likely. But Alauddin Khilji knew exactly who he was facing. He understood the model tactics, the terror they inspired.
He'd faced them before.
There had been earlier raids, yes. So he did something quite radical for Indian warfare at the time. He imposed incredibly strict discipline. The sources say he issued orders that any commander who moved his troops without a direct order from the Sultan himself would be immediately beheaded.
Wow. That's serious discipline, trying to prevent rash charges that would play into Mongol hands.
Precisely. He wanted to counter Mongol fluidity with rigid control. And the Delhi army had another asset the Europeans lacked: war elephants.
Ah, the elephants. How did they factor in?
They were a powerful shock element. Big, intimidating, hard for cavalry to charge directly, relatively resistant to arrows initially. They could disrupt formations and provide a psychological counterweight to the Mongol cavalry, a unique element the Mongols hadn't faced much in their Western campaigns.
Okay, so the two armies meet near Kili, which is just outside Delhi. Aladdin knows he's likely outnumbered. What's his strategy?
He plays it smart. He knows a quick open battle favors the Mongols, so he opts for defense, he fortifies his camp, uses delay tactics, maybe hoping to wear the Mongols down, stretch their supplies, or perhaps wait for reinforcements. He's refusing to take the bait and charge out.
But history loves ambitious generals, doesn't it?
It seems so. Just as Aladdin is trying to enforce caution, one of his most famous and highly respected generals, Zafar Khan, makes a fateful decision.
This is the turning point. Zafar Khan's rashness.
It's the critical moment of the battle. Zafar Khan commanded one wing of the Delhi army. He saw what he thought was an opportunity against the Mongol left wing, commanded by Hilak. Maybe he thought they looked vulnerable, maybe he was just eager for glory. Whatever the reason, he attacked. Prematurely, disobeying the Sultan's explicit life-or-death orders.
Oh, boy. Now, let me guess. The Mongols feigned retreat.
You guessed it. Hilak's wing did exactly what Mongol doctrine dictated. They pretended to break, turned, and fled. Zafar Khan, maybe blinded by the apparent success, pursued them fiercely.
Stretching his forces thin, leaving the main Delhi army behind.
Exactly. He completely overextended his division, chasing Hilak for miles, becoming totally isolated from the disciplined bulk of Aladdin's forces.
And then the hidden reserve comes out.
Targi? Bingo. Targi's hidden Mongol force, likely cavalry, emerged precisely as planned. They didn't even necessarily attack Zafar Khan directly at first. They just moved to block his path back to the main Delhi army. Zafar Khan realized too late that he was trapped.
Surrounded, exhausted, cut off. A classic Mongol killbox.
A classic. But what happened next? This is what makes Kili different. Zafar Khan and his men, reportedly reduced to maybe only 1,000 horsemen by this point, knew they were doomed. But instead of surrendering or routing, they fought.
A doomed stand.
An incredibly fierce, doomed stand. They turned and charged the Mongols surrounding them, fighting with absolute desperation. The sources, even Mongol-leaning ones, acknowledged the sheer ferocity. Zafar Khan himself is said to have fought like a lion.
Did they inflict casualties?
Significant casualties. Again, numbers are debated, but some accounts claim that Zafar Khan's small, doomed force killed something like 5,000 Mongol warriors before they were finally overwhelmed, and Zafar Khan himself was slain.
5,000 Mongols. That's a huge price to pay for trapping one division.
A massive price. Mongol warfare was predicated on achieving victory with minimal losses to their own elite troops. This was anything but minimal. They won the tactical engagement, they destroyed Zafar Khan's division, but the cost was shocking.
Which leads to the really interesting part. Mongol hesitation and retreat. After wiping out Zafar Khan, even at high cost, why didn't they press the attack on Aladdin's main army? They still likely had the numbers, and they'd just eliminated a key enemy general.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there are probably several factors at play. First, that psychological blow we just talked about.
Seeing 5,000 of your comrades killed by 1,000 desperate men, that has to shake your confidence.
Absolutely. It showed that the Delhi soldiers, when cornered, could fight with terrifying effectiveness. It suggested that attacking Aladdin's main disciplined force might be incredibly bloody. Mongol commanders were generally risk-averse when it came to their own manpower. Second, there's strong evidence, or at least strong suggestions in some sources, that the overall Mongol commander, Kuatlu Khwaja, was seriously wounded during the battle, maybe even mortally.
If the top commander is down, that changes everything.
It throws the whole command structure into disarray. Subordinates are less likely to take bold risks without clear orders from the top. Caution becomes the default setting.
And they were facing Aladdin, who wasn't budging, right? His main force was still disciplined, still waiting behind fortifications.
Exactly. Aladdin refused to panic, refused to be drawn out by Zafar Khan's fate. His army remained intact and disciplined. The Mongols were also operating deep in enemy territory near the major capital city of Delhi, with the Yamuna River possibly restricting their maneuverability. Logistical concerns might have started to bite.
So high casualties, potential leadership vacuum, a disciplined enemy who wouldn't take the bait, and maybe logistical worries.
That combination seems to have done it. The Mongols paused. They assessed the situation for a couple of days after Zafar Khan's stand. They probed, perhaps, but didn't commit to a full-scale assault on Aladdin's main line. And then on the third night, they just left.
They retreated back to Central Asia.
They withdrew, packed up and headed home. They hadn't conquered Delhi, hadn't shattered Aladdin's army. They had won a costly tactical victory against one division, but lost the strategic initiative.
So the consequences of Kili were huge, weren't they? Even though it wasn't a clear Delhi victory on the field.
Immense strategic consequences. First, it shattered the aura of invincibility, at least in India. Kili proved very publicly that the Mongols could be stopped. That disciplined defense and sheer resolve, even if it meant sacrificing brave soldiers like Zafar Khan, could actually halt the seemingly unstoppable tide.
That must have been a huge morale boost for the Delhi Sultanate and other Indian states.
Definitely. And it had a direct strategic prevention effect. Kili essentially saved the Delhi Sultanate from being absorbed into the Chagatai Khanate at that point. It set the stage for Aladdin Khilji to successfully repel several subsequent Mongol invasions in the early 1300s. He'd learned how to fight them.
And for Aladdin himself.
A massive legitimacy boost. His iron discipline, his refusal to retreat or panic, even when a top general disobeyed orders, proved his strength as a ruler. He had faced the ultimate terror of the age and survived. His authority was cemented.
So Kili shows that determined, disciplined external resistance could challenge the Mongol military machine. It wasn't literally invincible.
Exactly. It could be blunted, stopped, forced to retreat, especially if they faced high costs or logistical challenges.
And this is the core of our deep dive today. The sources are really clear, aren't they? While battles like Kili might halt an invasion, they weren't the reason the entire Mongol Empire eventually crumbled. The ultimate cause wasn't external enemies like Aladdin.
No, the ultimate cause was internal. It came from within the empire itself.
Which brings us right back to that fragile foundation.
Right. It transitions us perfectly into the real heart of the matter, the financial and administrative decay.
Okay, so if we connect a battle like Kili, a setback, a check on military expansion, to the much bigger story of the end of the Mongol Empire,
Yeah.
the argument we're exploring is that the decisive factor wasn't military at all.
Overwhelmingly, the evidence points to financial and economic stress as the primary driver of the collapse across the different Khanates.
Yeah.
It boils down to this. The Mongols built a system that was incredibly profitable during the expansion phase: loot, tribute, new territories.
But they never figured out how to make it work once the expansion stopped.
Precisely. The system shifted from being based on incoming conquest revenue to being based on outgoing administrative costs. And those costs were ruinous. That transition proved fatal.
They were conquerors, maybe the best ever. But they were pretty terrible governors in the long run.
That's a harsh way to put it, but in terms of building sustainable states, especially in settled agricultural societies, yeah, their record is not great. They built an empire on speed, extraction, and military might, but they failed fundamentally to create the economic structures needed to sustain it once the easy money from conquest dried up.
Okay, so let's break down how this financial failure happened. The sources point to, four main pillars of this financial strain, four key weaknesses that hollowed out the empire from the inside.
Right. The first one is almost obvious, given the scale: overextension and excessive administrative costs.
Just the sheer size of the thing.
The sheer size, exactly. Think about what it takes to govern the largest contiguous land empire in history. You need garrisons stationed everywhere, from Eastern Europe to Korea. You need a bureaucracy to manage taxes and administration. You need to maintain that incredible communication system, the yam relay stations with horses and riders constantly ready.
That all costs a fortune.
An absolute fortune. And these costs didn't go down when the conquest stopped. If anything, they went up as infrastructure aged and populations needed managing.
The sources specifically mentioned the Yuan dynasty in China, right? Kublai Khan's domain.
Yes, because China provides a stark example. To rule China effectively, or even semi-effectively, the Yuan Mongols had to take on the traditional responsibilities of a Chinese dynasty. That meant massive spending on public works, maintaining the Grand Canal, a vital transport artery, upkeep of irrigation systems crucial for agriculture, managing granaries for famine relief.
Things that nomadic conquerors maybe weren't naturally inclined to prioritize.
Or perhaps just didn't have the experience or the sustainable income streams to manage effectively long-term. These costs kept rising, but the income from new conquests had vanished. They were running a massive deficit with no easy way to fill the gap.
Which leads directly to the second pillar, doesn't it? If you can't conquer for loot anymore and your admin costs are sky high, you have to get the money from somewhere else.
Which meant fiscal mismanagement and taxation burdens. Facing this fiscal crunch, the Mongol regimes across the Khanates basically had two options: develop sound, sustainable economic policies and fair taxation,
Oh.
or resort to squeezing the existing population dry through crushing taxes and engage in, well, pretty disastrous financial shortcuts. Mostly, they chose the latter.
And this is where it gets really bad, especially in Yuan China,
Hmm.
with the money itself.
Yes, the mismanagement of currency in Yuan China is a critical factor. They needed cash, lots of it, fast to pay the bills, but they didn't have enough silver or other forms of hard currency. So what do? They printed paper money. Lots and lots of paper money.
The chap?
The Chow, exactly. Now, paper money itself wasn't new in China, but the Yuan dynasty printed it on an unprecedented scale without sufficient backing in silver or goods. It was essentially fiat currency, but printed with reckless abandon to cover government expenses.
So massive inflation, hyperinflation even.
Catastrophic hyperinflation. The value of the Chow plummeted.
Yeah.
You needed more and more paper notes to buy anything. Imagine needing a cartload of cash just to buy rice. It wiped out savings. It made trade incredibly difficult. It destroyed the economic security of farmers, merchants, everyone who relied on the currency.
And what does that do to people's trust in the government?
It shatters it completely. If the money the government issues becomes worthless, why would you trust anything else they do? Add to this rampant corruption, officials skimming taxes, demanding bribes, and the whole system just lost all legitimacy in the eyes of the Chinese population. This wasn't just bad economics. It fueled massive social unrest and rebellion.
Okay, so pillar 1, cost too high. Pillar 2, terrible money management and taxes leading to unrest. What's the third pillar? This one sounds like it came from outside, but hit them where they were already weak.
Right. Pillar 3 was an external shock that perfectly exploited the empire's interconnectedness and internal weaknesses. The Black Death and trade disruption.
The plague, which spread because of the Mongols in a way.
That's the terrible irony, isn't it? The Pax Mongolica, that period of relative peace and secure trade routes across Eurasia that the Mongols themselves had established, that became the highway for the bubonic plague in the mid-14th century. Yersinia pestis traveled along the Silk Road, carried by fleas on rats, probably hopping between Mongol trade caravans and armies.
So their greatest achievement, connecting the world, enabled their demographic catastrophe.
Precisely. And the economic impact was devastating, hitting them on two fronts simultaneously.
First, the population loss.
Massive demographic collapse. Estimates vary, but huge percentages of the population died across Eurasia, including in the Mongol territories. This drastically shrank the tax base. Fewer farmers meant less agricultural output, less food, less revenue. Fewer merchants meant less trade. The very foundation of the economy was decimated.
And the second front, the trade itself.
The trade system that the plague had used to spread, it crumbled in the plague's aftermath. With the chaos, the population loss, the fear, the security of the Pax Mongolica broke down. Long-distance trade became much more dangerous and contracted sharply. Those vital taxes and tolls from Silk Road commerce, which had been a major source of income, dried up.
So the plague didn't just kill people. It killed the economic engine of the empire.
It delivered a massive blow to an already stressed system. And that brings us to the fourth pillar, which is about the political structure itself falling apart. Fragmentation and loss of centralized revenue.
This is about the different Khanates turning on each other.
Essentially, yes. After Kublai Khan died in 1294, the nominal unity of the Mongol Empire really became a fiction. The four major Khanates, the Yuan in China and Mongolia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde on the Russian steppe increasingly acted like independent, often rival kingdoms.
So no more cooperation, no sharing the wealth.
Pretty much the opposite. They competed for resources, sometimes fought wars against each other. The idea of a central treasury or pooling resources vanished. They stopped paying tribute to the Great Khan in China, who was often embroiled in his own internal Yuan problems anyway. Crucially, they stopped helping each other out.
So if one Khanate, like the Yuan, was collapsing under hyperinflation and rebellion,
the others weren't sending aid packages. They were focused on their own survival, maybe even looking for opportunities to pick at the carcass. This loss of central coordination meant that each part of the empire had to face its crises alone. The synergy that had made the early empire so powerful was gone.
it's a cascade, isn't it? High costs, bad money, plague hits, trade collapses, and everyone stops working together.
It's a perfect storm of internal decay. The system started as this hyper-efficient military extraction machine, basically looting the world, but it ended up as this collection of brittle, bankrupt, administratively overwhelmed states.
And how did this financial death spiral lead to the final unraveling process? How did the bankruptcy translate into actual political collapse?
It happened in stages, really. Stage one was predictable, military decline.
Can't pay the soldiers?
Can't pay the soldiers reliably, yes.
Yep.
But also, remember how crucial those vast herds of remount horses were? Maintaining them was incredibly expensive. Shrinking revenues meant Khans couldn't afford the horses, couldn't afford the best equipment, couldn't maintain the same level of training and readiness. The quality of the Mongol armies, the very thing that defined them, started to degrade significantly. Morale plummeted. The engine of destruction sputtered.
Okay, weaker army. What's stage two?
Rebellions, that toxic mix of crushing taxes, worthless money, corrupt officials, failing public services, and a visibly weakening military. It was fuel for revolt.
Like the Red Turbans in China you mentioned.
Exactly. The Red Turban Rebellion wasn't just a political movement against foreign rulers. It was fundamentally an economic uprising by peasants and others ruined by human fiscal policies and neglect. And similar revolts flared up in Persia, in Central Asia. Local populations saw their chance to throw off the Mongol yoke as the central government weakened. This accelerated the fragmentation process.
And stage three, the final push.
External pressure. Once the Mongol states were weakened, internally financially broke, militarily degraded, facing constant rebellion, it created an opportunity for their neighbors. Powers that had previously been terrified of the Mongols now saw a chance to push back or even take over.
And the biggest example is the Ming dynasty overthrowing the Yuan in China.
That's the definitive one. The Ming Rebellion, led by Zhu Yuansang, capitalized on the chaos and popular hatred of the Han. They successfully fought their way to power, captured the capital, and drove the last Yuan emperor back to the Mongolian steppe in 1368. Once the Yuan lost China, the richest, most populous part of the empire, any hope of restoring Mongol dominance was gone. The economic heartland was lost. The other Khanate eventually withered or were absorbed by rising regional powers like Russia and Timur's empire.
It really is the ultimate historical irony, isn't it? The military system that could hypothetically wipe out 100,000 knights in 3 days ultimately gets beaten by, what, bad monetary policy?
Yeah.
A failing budget?
An invisible enemy, yeah. Uncontrolled spending, hyperinflation, corruption, disease.
Yeah.
The balance sheet. Turns out that's often the most dangerous enemy for any empire.
Which really makes you wonder, is this Mongol story just a one-off? Or is this pattern the empire collapsing, not from invasion, but from internal economic failure, something we see again and again throughout history?
Oh, it's far from unique. The Mongol case is dramatic because of the speed and scale, but the underlying mechanism, fiscal exhaustion leading to political collapse, that seems to be almost a universal law of empires.
So the sources we looked at draw parallels with, what, 14 other empires?
At least. And when you look at them together, the recurring themes are undeniable. While the specifics change the culture, the technology, the century, the fundamental reasons for decline often rhyme.
Okay, let's explore that. Let's group these examples, like the sources do, to see these recurring patterns. First up, theme A, fiscal and economic exhaustion. Just empires that basically went broke.
And where else to start but the Western Roman Empire? It's the absolute classic case study.
Right. Everyone talks about the barbarian invasions, but the empire was rotting long before they arrived.
Absolutely. The costs were immense. Maintaining those huge legions on far-flung frontiers, endless civil wars, paying off potential threats, building infrastructure. It just kept growing. How did they pay for it? Debasing the currency, reducing the silver content in coins until they were almost worthless. Sound familiar?
Very Yuan dynasty.
Exactly. Spiraling inflation, crushing taxes on agriculture that drove farmers off their land, reliance on expensive mercenaries because citizens couldn't or wouldn't serve. The Roman state essentially bankrupted its own society over centuries. The barbarians didn't conquer a thriving superpower. They largely took over regions that were already economically shattered and politically decentralized.
Okay, fast forward 1,000 years or so, the Spanish Empire. They had the opposite problem initially, didn't they? Too much money from the New World.
Kind of. They had a flood of silver, especially from the mines at Potosi in Bolivia. But this wealth became a curse in disguise. It fueled massive inflation, not just in Spain, but across Europe. And critically, it made Spanish goods uncompetitive. Why bother developing Spanish industry when you could just buy cheaper stuff from England or the Netherlands with all that silver?
The Dutch disease, they call it sometimes.
Right. resource wealth paradoxically undermining the rest of the economy. Plus, Spain spent that silver constantly on endless, ruinously expensive wars fighting the Dutch, the French, the Ottomans, everyone. They defaulted on their national debt multiple times. So they were swimming in silver, but the actual Spanish economy stagnated and the state was perpetually broke.
Then there's the Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe in the 19th century. Was that also financial?
Largely, yes. While they had military setbacks, the core issue was economic stagnation compared to the industrializing West. Their traditional craft guilds couldn't compete with mass production. They failed to modernize their economy or financial systems effectively. They took on massive debts to European powers, leading to foreign control over their finances. They were fiscally exhausted and dependent long before the final military collapse after World War I.
And even into the late 20th century, the Soviet Union.
A perfect modern example. Its collapse wasn't a military defeat. Nobody invaded Moscow. It imploded from within due to structural economic failure.
The command economy just couldn't keep up.
It couldn't generate enough wealth or innovation. The massive cost of the Cold War arms race, supporting satellite states, propping up inefficient industries. It drained the state dry. Meanwhile, it couldn't deliver basic consumer goods that people in the West took for granted. The system just ground to a halt due to its own inefficiency and inability to balance the books. Economic exhaustion, pure and simple.
Okay, that's a powerful theme. What about theme, overreach, internal decay, and fragmentation, where the administration or the social fabric starts to tear even if the military isn't totally broken yet?
Here, think about the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. It lasted 1,000 years after the West fell, but it was plagued by problems.
Like what?
Constant internal strife, civil wars, succession disputes, religious schisms that divided the population, corruption was often rampant, and then catastrophic events like the Fourth Crusade in 1204, where Western crusaders actually sacked Constantinople. The empire never fully recovered its strength or resources after blows like that. It was a slow fragmentation, losing territory bit by bit due to internal weakness as much as external pressure.
And in China, again, much later, the Qing dynasty, they faced internal collapse too, didn't they?
Massively so. In the 19th century, China's population exploded, but agricultural output didn't keep pace. This led to widespread poverty, famine, and huge peasant uprisings. The Taiping Rebellion being the most devastating, killing tens of millions. Add in systemic corruption, the shock of defeats by Western powers in the Opium Wars revealing their military backwardness, and the failure to modernize effectively. The dynasty lost the mandate of heaven, its legitimacy, long before the final revolution in 1911.
We also see this in the Mongol Empire in India. A powerful empire, but it didn't last that long in its peak.
Right. After the reign of Emperor Aurangzeb in the early 1700s, things went downhill fast. His religious intolerance alienated many non-Muslim subjects, especially Hindus. Endless wars of succession drained the treasury. Regional governors became increasingly independent. This internal fragmentation created a power vacuum.
Which the Europeans exploited.
Exactly, particularly the British East India Company. They played different factions off against each other, used their economic leverage, and gradually took control. The Mughals faded away due to internal division and economic exploitation, not a single decisive military defeat by a foreign power initially.
Okay, then there's theme C, rapid collapse via internal division and shock, where things fall apart really quickly because internal fault lines are hit hard.
The Aztec and Inca empires are the prime examples here. Their collapse seems incredibly fast when the Spanish arrive.
And disease played a huge role, smallpox especially.
Devastatingly so. Biological catastrophe wiped out a huge percentage of the population, undermining their ability to resist. But the sources emphasize another crucial factor: internal dissent.
Meaning?
Neither the Aztecs nor the Incas were homogeneous, happy empires. They were built by conquering and dominating other peoples who were often deeply resentful of the ruling power. When Cortés arrived in Mexico, he found numerous subject peoples eager to ally with him against the Aztecs. They provided the bulk of his army.
So it wasn't just a few hundred Spaniards against millions.
Not at all. It was Spaniards leading a massive indigenous rebellion against the Aztec state. Similarly, when Pizarro reached Peru, the Inca Empire was just emerging from a brutal civil war between two brothers vying for the throne. The empire was already fractured and weakened.
And both empires were very centralized, weren't they, around the ruler?
Extremely centralized, politically and religiously. So when the Spanish managed to capture the emperors Moctezuma and Atahualpa, it decapitated the empires incredibly effectively. The rigid, top-down structure proved brittle. Without the divine ruler, the system snapped, especially with all those underlying resentments boiling up.
Moving into the 20th century again, Theme D, modern military overreach. Even supposedly efficient modern states can break themselves.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the German Reich under the Nazis. It was an empire built entirely on aggression and unsustainable expansion.
Their economy was geared for war.
Completely. It relied on looting conquered territories and exploiting slave labor. But militarily, Hitler made catastrophic errors. Invading the Soviet Union opened a massive, resource-draining second front they couldn't win. Declaring war on the United States brought overwhelming industrial power against them. Strategic bombing devastated their cities and industry. The whole system was ideologically fanatical, but logistically and strategically unsound for a long war. It burned itself out.
A similar story with the Japanese Empire in the same period.
Very similar in terms of militaristic overreach. Blind faith in military expansion, underestimating opponents, stretching their resources far too thin across the Pacific and Asia. Their attack on Pearl Harbor provoked the United States, a power whose industrial capacity dwarfed Japan's.
And the U.S. oil embargo crippled them.
Crippled their war machine, yeah. Like Nazi Germany, the Japanese Empire was built on a foundation of rapid conquests that proved unsustainable against determined, industrially superior foes. It collapsed under external military pressure that it had itself provoked through overreach.
Finally, Theme E, post-war decolonization. This seems slightly different, empires giving up colonies often without a final military defeat.
It is different in mechanism, but the underlying cause often links back to economics and legitimacy. Look at the British Empire.
The empire on which the sun never set.
Well, the sun set pretty quickly after World War II. Why? Partly because the two world wars had financially ruined Britain. They simply couldn't afford the massive cost of administering and policing the vast empire anymore. At the same time, nationalism was rising everywhere, India, Africa. Maintaining control by force was becoming increasingly costly and morally untenable.
And Britain wasn't the dominant industrial power anymore either.
No, the U.S. and rebuilt Germany and Japan were outpacing them. The economic logic of empire had faded. Granting independence, starting with India in 1947, was an acknowledgement of this new economic and political reality. It wasn't necessarily a military defeat, but a recognition that the imperial model was bankrupt, literally and figuratively.
Similar story for the French colonial empire.
Very similar. Exhausted by World War II, then bled white by costly, unsuccessful colonial wars in Indochina, Vietnam, and Algeria. These wars were hugely expensive and deeply unpopular at home. France, like Britain, realized it couldn't afford to hold on to its colonies through direct rule anymore and shifted towards maintaining influence through economic and cultural ties instead. The cost, both financial and human, just became too high.
So, when you pull all these threads together, Rome, the Yuan, Spain, the Soviets, Moguls, Aztecs, Nazis, the British, what's the connecting pattern?
The pattern is that military strength is rarely enough in the long run. Empires consistently seem to decay from within because of economic overstretched spending more than you can sustainably bring in. Political corruption and inefficiency erode trust and siphon resources. Technological or economic stagnation leaves you vulnerable to more dynamic rivals. Ideological rigidity prevents adaptation. Ultimately, it's the loss of legitimacy, the belief among the ruled population that the rulers deserve to rule, often driven by those economic failures and perceived injustices.
So power isn't just on the battlefield. It's maybe even more fundamentally in the balance sheet, in social trust, in the government actually working for its people.
That seems to be the brutal lesson of history, yes. Military might can build an empire quickly, like the Mongols did, but only sound finances, competent administration, and a degree of popular consent can sustain it. When those internal factors rot away, the whole magnificent structure becomes incredibly fragile, just waiting for a push, whether it's rebellion, an invasion, or just economic reality biting hard. #tag outro.
Okay, let's try and synthesize this. 3 big takeaways from our deep dive today. First, those Mongol military tactics, revolutionary stuff, mobility, the bow, psychology, command, they really could shatter conventional armies in ways that seemed almost supernatural at the time.
Absolutely, the perfect war machine for a while. Second takeaway, that machine wasn't literally invincible. As we saw at Kili in India, disciplined, resolute defense, even if costly, could stop them. Their aura could be challenged.
But the third, and maybe the most crucial takeaway for understanding the long arc of history, the final collapse. The reason the Mongol Empire didn't last, it wasn't the battlefield. It was fundamentally financial.
Yep. Overspending, hyperinflation from printing money like the Chow, crushing taxes, corruption, the Black Death hitting trade and population. It all led to internal decay that no army could fix.
So the history of empire, whether it's Rome, the Mongols, maybe even the Soviets, seems to teach this constant kind of chilling lesson, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you rely too much on expansion, on just extracting wealth, if you mismanage your finances, if you lose the trust of your people through corruption and incompetence, you're building a fragile pyramid.
A pyramid waiting to crumble. Military brilliance builds the shiny exterior, but it's the sustainable, legitimate economic and social foundation that actually holds it up over time.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final provocative thought to maybe chew on.
What major power structures today might be relying too heavily on things that look a bit like those historical failure points? Maybe unsustainable levels of debt. Maybe financial systems that seem based more on speculation than real production. Maybe extractive economic models that benefit a few but alienate many.
Are there modern empires, or maybe just powerful nations, where the biggest long-term threat isn't actually another country's military, but maybe their own internal economic fragility, their own balance sheet?
Is history repeating itself just with different spreadsheets? Something for you to mull over.
Definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into why even the mightiest empires fall.